Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries, an organization that exists to connect the Christian faith with the realities of everyday life. I'm Scott Jones, and I'll be your host. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. Normally, we release episodes every Friday in concert with our weekend roundup, Another Week Ends. This is the thing to read if you're looking for a grace-infused Christian cosmopolitan guide to the content of the World Wide Web. This is a special episode, however. In it, we discuss the release of the most recent edition of Mockingbird magazine. Its focus, technology. It's great for the technophiles and the technophobes and everyone in between. In just a moment, I'll be joined by Ethan Richardson, the issue's editor, and David Zoll, Mockingbird's founder. But before we chat, let's take a moment to visit antiquity. You know, Togoland. In his dialogue, The Phaedrus, Plato tells a story about a guy telling a story. The guy telling the story is Socrates, and he's telling it to his friend Phaedrus. It's a story from ancient Egypt where King Thamus is hosting the god Theuth, the inventor of many things, many of which you probably loathed in middle school, like numbers, calculation, astronomy, and writing. Thales was showing off his inventions to the king, arguing that they should be made available to all Egyptians. For a long time, Thamus evaluates each of Thales' inventions, pointing out the pluses and the minuses of each. But when it comes to writing, King Thamos passes a categorically negative judgment. Theuth, my paragon of inventors, the discoverer of an art, is not the best judge of the good or harm which will accrue to those who practice it. Those who acquire it will cease to exercise their memory and become forgetful. They will rely on writing to bring things to their remembrance by external signs instead of by their own internal resources. What you have discovered is a receipt for recollection, not for memory. And as for wisdom, your pupils will have the reputation for it without the reality. And because they are filled with the conceit of wisdom instead of real wisdom, they will be a burden too. In his book Technopoly, Neil Postman points out that Thamos' error is not his claim that writing will impair memory and create false wisdom. It's clearly done that over the years. It's his thinking that writing will be only a burden to society and nothing but a burden. All technology, new and old, is both a burden and blessing. Not either or, but this and that. May grace help us as we sort out the difference. So I am here with Ethan Richardson, who is the editor of the technology issue of the Mockingbird magazine, and with David Zoll, Mockingbird's executive director and founder. And we're going to talk for a few minutes about this recent issue of the magazine, the technology issue. Now, Ethan is the editor. Well, both of you, because you both have a vested interest in seeing people read this because you poured some time, energy, blood, sweat, tears into it. What about people that say, technology, it's just not for, I'm not a techie. I'm not into that whole scene. So this seems like usually I love how universal your themes are about love and forgiveness and the human condition. And I so connect with it because it's where I live. But technology, I can't even, I've never tweeted. What would you say?
Yeah, no, that's something that we've run into quite a bit, and actually in Dave's essay, he tells a story about someone at one of our conferences coming up, and Dave was headed to the breakout session that was covering technology, and this guy was an older guy, and he said, I can't say that I'm very much of a technology person. And as soon as he says this, he pulls out his iPhone to check a text and wanders off. And I guess it's funny because you think about the phrase, well, you just think about technology in general, and you think about gadgets, the type of people who would buy geeky magazines and would consider themselves gamers. And I'm not one of those people, but the way that we're coming at technology is instead looking at how it's sort of invisibly becoming the way we exist every day. It's sort of becoming the way that we communicate with one another, the way that we navigate the world that we're in, the way that we think about ourselves and think about our lives. And so, as far as themes go, this issue was bound to be more difficult to get into people's ears. But I think what's come out is really beautiful because it's really just the story of people.
So unless somebody's like making a beeline for an Amish community in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, or thereabouts, this does affect their lives in pervasive ways, whether or not they see. And maybe actually it's more important for people that think they're more outside of the technorati class.
Yeah, I mean, as much as you tend to believe that you are not a techie person, it just goes to show how invisible it's really become in our day-to-day life. I mean, when was the last time you checked your phone for a text message? When was the last time you?
Wait, can you say that again? I was just checking my phone for a text message. I was looking at a text. I was texting.
Yeah,
somebody.
I was too while I was talking to you.
Yeah, I think that is a pretty apt description of reality. You know, the phenomena too, David says something in his piece about there's a difference between expression and communication. And not that either is bad, but like if you're trying to communicate with somebody and convey empathy or appreciation or attempt to like evoke understanding, you're going to have to be more sensitive and dialed into them. Where sometimes, you meet these people, and I can think of several people in my own life that are these mild-mannered people that are pretty even keel and measured. And then if it's politics or cultural hot-button issues, I mean, it's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde they become on social media. And it's a fascinating reality where we go into this bubble of expression without communication that really is seeming to make life at times really toxic.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, one of the recurring themes, I think, in a lot of the pieces is this theme of that was first coined by Augustine, but was sort of refashioned by Luther of incurvatus in se, that human beings are naturally curved inward on themselves, and technology shows better than really anything else how that happens on an individual level. That we tend to look to express rather than to communicate. Like our natural inclination is to sort of look at ways to sort of curate ourselves, but not really look outward at all.
Yeah, and it's one of those things like I guess it sort of amplifies, if you can dig like, a certain size ditch in an hour with a shovel and a much bigger one with a backhoe, maybe the danger is like, with a smartphone and an iPad, I mean, the incurvature can become a pretty deep chasm.
We found that we use that term so much on the website. It's just become such a shorthand for so much frankly, about technology with things like filter bubbles. And there's this great New Yorker cover of a guy sort of checking his phone and completely curved in against the world, that we decided to, we noticed it wasn't in the glossary of terms that was on the website. So we actually commissioned someone to write a glossary entry on incurvatus in se. And it's sort of like a bonus in the issue. But it was really fun for a theologian, I think, to go into that specific phrase, because it's one that we've found ourselves using more and more and more. I was laughing because I actually today, the New Yorker's the cartoon, I think, for this week is of two girls, like teenage girls, on a bed checking their phones, looking at their phones, and the caption reads, "When I make eye contact for the first time, I want it to be with the right person." And I mean, that's just, to me, it says a lot about what we were trying to accomplish with this issue, because there's we found, as like we're putting it together, that we're just negotiating so many different value judgments about people not wanting to say that they're interested in technology or could be considered a technology person, to the ways that technology allows you to actually not consider yourself that way. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's this deep, like, onion of identity politics made and curation that is insidious is one way to look at it, but we also talk a lot about the positives that go along with it. And that, as Ethan keeps saying, like, that was a huge challenge, to not be alarmist or just overly pessimistic.
Yeah, I mean,
I think that's one of the strengths of the issue, like especially in the kind of programmatic piece, you lay out in the beginning. Like, you really do a good job of saying, look, we're not trying to kind of reify technology into this kind of boogeyman or something. That it's a tool. Like, it's not, what it does to the human condition, because we're fallen and fragile and faltering. That's not necessarily the fault of the technology itself. So I feel like you guys are do a good job of going into it with eyes wide open, and yet without a judgmental, alarmist kind of, if you watch cable news, every other commercial on one cable political channel is William Devane. Hey, have you saved up enough gold for when the apocalypse comes? I feel like you guys do a nice job of really trying to be more descriptive than prescriptive.
Yeah, thanks. That's definitely the aim. And I mean, for the most part, these essays are, they're not written by Luddites. They're written by people who have a hard time having conversations when they're looking at their phone. They're written by people who need to get a flip phone because they find that their smartphone is ruining their lives. They're written by porn watchers and people, struggling to sort of make do with the technological decisions that have affected their lives. And so, yeah, it's different to talk about it from the perspective of someone who is outside of it, as opposed to someone who is actually in it with the reader.
You have an interview here with Nicholas Carr, which is something I think to be pretty excited about. Can you say a little bit about, for listeners that aren't familiar with his work, who are going to get the issue, like, why should they run and not walk to read this?
Yeah, I mean, interview? So we have Nicholas Carr is our interview for this issue, and he's the author of in 2010 The Shallows, which is sort of it was a groundbreaking piece on what the internet is doing to our minds and the way that we think and the way that we think about ourselves and the way that we view deeper existential questions. And it was a Pulitzer finalist. It's a profound book. And then his most recent book, which just came out last year, is called The Glass Cage: Automation and Us. And in this book, he's talking about how because things have become so automatic, how we can navigate ourselves through our daily lives without actually having to process why we're doing them or how to do them, that it actually changes the way that we enjoy our lives and the way that we process what we're doing. And so we had a really great conversation with him. He's talking to us about parts of the book. In one part, he's talking about the Wright brothers and how when they first designed a plane, they wanted a plane that actually wasn't, the goal wasn't stability. The goal was that the pilot would feel the plane move with them as it was flying in the air. And as time has gone on, they've actually designed planes that are more stable. But the cost of that stability is that when a plane hits rough air or something happens, God forbid, pilots have become so programmed to the automation that they no longer know how to sort of manually fly on their own. So he talks about some of the crashes that have happened in recent history.
Scary.
Yeah, it's terrifying. And mainly just to as a picture of like what automation sort of numbs us to.
So are there questions you could ask your pilot when you get on Southwest? Like, hey, how's your intuition for the feel of the plane,
Right.
dude? Like, just, on a 1 to 10 scale.
Can we
like,
talk your manual flying skills here for a sec?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The other thing you have, I mean, it's interesting. You have this, I love the title, Unreconciled and Disembodied, Why Sex on the Internet Sucks. I mean, so much of the internet is sexually driven, right? So I think this is by Sarah Condon. This is a very interesting piece about the sort of disconnection of body and soul that online intimacy can lead to.
Yeah, it's a great piece, and Sarah's a great voice in the magazine, and really it's something that that came late in the game. Early on in the editing phase, we had the entire journal together, and we realized that we missed something on like pornography, which is like such a huge part of the internet industry. I mean, the porn industry has a higher income than the National Football League, and so it would be sort of silly not to talk about it.
Yeah, they put Playboy out of business. I mean, Playboy is no longer going to feature nude photos.
Right. Yeah, and Sarah's thing is, I mean, she's mainly talking about sort of when sex becomes this electronic acquisition, we lose the picture of sex as vulnerability, or as two weak people coming together and seeing each other in a vulnerable place, and therefore we lose the whole point, which is love and
intimacy, right?
And intimacy, yeah, for sure. So.
It's interesting. My friend and colleague Bill Bohr and I do this podcast, New Persuasive Words, and we're releasing one Friday. We just record, and the title was Spiritual Sexting. We talked about how like the sexting thing, but then we talked about how like almost more disconcerting is this other form of inappropriate, weird intimacy, where you post this fall outrage over the Starbucks red cups, or you just like we've all read this Facebook post, right? Where, oh my gosh, the most emotionally trying, exasperating, challenging experience of my life happened today, and I just can't hold on. So that 60 people can say what happened, who you haven't seen. Like,
right.
Rather than call a friend and be vulnerable, you'd rather get like fall consolation from someone you hadn't seen since your junior year in high school that you're Facebook friends with. So it's like, I feel like Sarah in this piece has sort of scraped, has gotten to something that is so pervasive. Like people, well, I might not do sexually illicit things, but the fall vulnerability that maybe is even more damaging. So many of us are connected.
Oh, that's so true. Yeah, I mean, it's it's funny how many of these essays turned into a picture of validation hunger. That for the most part our online lives are just hungry for validation and affirmation, and what we will give up, all the things in our life we will give up for just like 5 seconds of the little buzz that we feel in our pockets. That's a little taste of affirmation.
And one last thing I just want to highlight, and there's so much great in this issue. I mean, I can't commend it enthusiastically enough, but I have thought a lot about this issue over the past couple of years, and I've never seen a thoughtful theological, cultural, and spiritual analysis of algorithms. And I mean that in all seriousness. I mean, it's this. So there's this essay, Time to Pull Over: Algorithms, Self-Driving Cars, and an Unkind Word About Fear, which it's by Brian Jarrell, who I don't know at all, but he sounds like an incredibly insightful person.
He's an Anglican minister, and he's our social media guy. He lives in West Virginia. Incredibly gifted, though. I'm not sure I want him behind the wheel after reading that piece.
Well, yeah, of course. I'm not saying I want to drive with him, but I'll tell you, this is something. Algorithms are just this driving force, and I thought his kind of nuanced, again, non-alarmist analysis, and even hopeful at points. But I think about, Barbara Kingsolver, the novelist. She and her family for a year just ate what they could get grown. Like, they didn't eat strawberries in January. They didn't, they ate for a year. And it's almost like Eucharistic eating, right? You're so grateful for the things. And I felt like some of his concluding thoughts about the spiritual implications of algorithms were some of the most creative theological insights I've read anywhere in a long time.
Wow, that's really that's awesome. Yeah, so Brian,
tell us what he said, Ethan.
Yeah, so Brian's talking about Google's kind of coming up with these self-driving cars. They plan to have them out in the next 20 years or something like that. And there's a huge number of people that have shown they will not drive a Google car. Like, they will always want to drive their own car. And for the most part, it's been seen as like sort of this strange strand of anti-progress thinking, when in every other sphere we're thinking like the more progress, the better. When it comes to people allowing computers to drive them from place to place, people don't want to give over the steering wheel. And Brian's basically saying it is proven that trusting these algorithms would be better for our safety. We would be, 90% less likely to have an accident if we were in a Google-driven car. But we don't want to do it. And I put myself in that camp. I don't want to do it. I love driving around. I hate flying because I'm out of control. But what he's getting to is that not trusting an algorithm as opposed to trusting it is actually a form of surrender, which I thought was really, really interesting.
And there's another seemingly all-present force, beginning with G, that if we surrendered to, it would probably be safer and better.
Yeah.
What's his name?
Gravity.
Gravity. Right, yeah. Gravity. Yes, gravity.
God.
Well, God.
Captain Obvious, sorry.
Well, guys, thanks so much for this issue and for taking time to talk about it. And I hope that it gets a lot of readership, because it's certainly encouraging, enlightening, and I think it gives people a gracious way to view themselves when they're ensconced in, the technopoly that we live in.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it.
Technology certainly does have a way of making human beings serve it rather than the other way around. But this is nothing new. Any created thing that tries to take the place of the creator does this, whether it's food or sex, love, or even religion. But Jesus said that he came that we might have life and have it in abundance. And in light of his love and God's unfailing grace, we can take heart that technology can be part of the story of abundant life. And so for ways to consider how that may be, check out a copy of the Mockingbird magazine. Thanks for being with us.